Hello everybody, welcome. So my last recording was lost, kind of like that really strange show that went on perhaps a bit too long, but was really fascinating. And the title of it was We Are the Aliens. So I'm going to try to recreate some of that today, here on this episode of Blow Yourself a New Mind. Because minds are like bubbles, and you can blow new ones. In fact, if you're not blowing yourself a new mind, something has probably gone terribly wrong. Okay, so that episode began shortly after listening to most of Joe Rogan's recent talk with Michael Masters, the author of the tempestrial hypothesis. By that way, that temp doesn't mean tempest as in storm, it means temp as in temporality. So what he's saying is the unacknowledged, or the meta-unacknowledged. And he's not saying, as dumb single-value derivations might claim, UFOs are humans from the future. It's not what he's saying at all. Though he is concerned with a branch of the phenomena that he finds some evidence and salience to imagining that this might be the case, or to fitting certain features of the phenomena with certain features of this hypothesis. So the phenomena is a very complex, branched array of things being situations, interactions. There's no chance of that thing being a single thing. Oh, it's just people from an alternate dimension. But it's also very unlikely, similarly, that none of it is people from an alternate dimension, or beings. Also, we tend to think of beings as separate. Probably vast portions of that which are not separate. And even the humans who claim that they're separate beings, right, we're an individual, you see them acting as members of vast collective groups, most of which are catastrophically disoriented. And I do mean catastrophically, I mean world-snuffingly disoriented. So you probably have situations where some beings appear and they are not separate beings, they are representatives of collectives, right? Something like this. I shall return momentarily. All right, so it's going to be difficult to retrace my steps, but I've got the skeleton of what took place in my mind, and we'll see what kind of fleshy appendages I can attach to it. Michael is a really interesting mind. Joe is also an interesting mind, but tends to stick very closely to his commonsensical misnomer of the universe mind. He likes pragmatic, concrete reality, most of which is not actually real in the way we imagine. So, as is common on podcasts, Joe asks Michael, how did you get involved in this? And Michael explains that he heard his father recounting a sighting when he was a child, maybe 5 or 6. And sometime thereafter, his dad brought home a copy of Whitley Strieber's Communion, a book which has triggered subterranean memories in probably millions of people. That book was face out on their family bookshelf. He remembers seeing it and then having a kind of a flash of insight, interior seeing. in which an image of like a Neanderthal, a modern human, and an alien were standing side by side. And this became his motivation for his academic quest. I think he's an anthropologist, maybe a physical anthropologist, biological anthropologist. And so this set him on the quest. Interesting that he turned to science to chase these questions. Now there's a lot of ground to cover here. And I have kind of a tall order, which is to recreate something that was actually pretty good, I think, in its first incarnation. The incarnation that failed due to the microphone on my phone recording from the phone mic instead of my headset mic, and me being unaware of this, which is really like most of my thinking. How most of my thinking is. It's a perfect metaphor for a lot of the thinking we do. So, in the beginning of this talk, I want to speak to something profound, and I want to not lose a certain bookmark. Let me see if I can find it. Perhaps it will return to me. I can see some of the anchors around which I need to orbit. So if you were looking at Earth from the sky, or you were traveling over the surface of the Earth, you would see something kind of inexplicable if you were an intelligent life form. What you would see is billions of fucking machines, and particularly vehicles, right? You'd be looking at stabilized physical vehicles that persist over time, which means living things don't. Our machines kill everything that's alive all day long just by existing. If that's not obvious to you, look at the road systems, right? It's just paved over nature. And our minds become like these road systems because we're used to traveling predictable routes instead of route finding or route making together. Me, I'm a kind of a scout, right? So I identify with the ranger archetype in RPGs, not solely, but very deeply. This is someone who goes off the trail and pathfinds and waymakes, establishing new directions that people can traverse more easily after it having been traversed by one of us. CF Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenesis and resonance perspective. So if you're looking at the Earth from above, you'd see this inexplicable phenomena, which is stable machines over time. Any world you saw this on, you know this is a signal that death is coming to that planet. Not necessarily explicitly, like the planet may survive this phase, but very few of them will, for lots of reasons that have to do with homeostasis of living worlds, the threat floor for living worlds without machines, and the vulnerabilities that arise in living worlds with machines. So this would be puzzling. It would be evidence that something has gone horribly wrong here. Billions of cars and ships and warships and warplanes and missiles and ridiculous nonsense that has nothing to do with being alive and everything to do with ending that game. For everyone, forever, around here. So that problem would wake up a bunch of sentinel systems in the same way. You know, yesterday there was a power outage here, very interesting phenomena, very profound. And I got a message from my internet provider, hey, we've detected a problem with your router that indicates there may be a power outage there. When the worlds are connected in a network, that's not when, the worlds are a network, and they're not just sending signals to each other over space. There's a domain where instantaneity prevails over linear time. And in that world, in that domain, the worlds are one world. one world in different bodies, in different places in time and space. So if you start messing one of those up, it should be obvious, A, that the damage is transferred to other worlds. There's no such thing as a separate world, except in thinking and language. And there are beings that watch over both the network and the bases of the network, and primary bases of that network are star systems and living planets. So if something starts messing with one of those very seriously, you're going to wake up a bunch of stuff, right? You're going to wake up predators. You're going to wake up altruists, rescuers. You're going to wake up engineers. You're going to wake up the network sentinels. And this is something that the humans don't seem to talk about, even though it should be fairly obvious from what we know of the phenomena and what people who have had encounters have told us they were shown and told. And there's this whole group of people like, yeah, it's just a grift, this is a prison planet, blah, 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 blah. Those people have no experience of anything, right? They're just doing that commonsensical thinking that dismisses anything that doesn't fit into its, bias framework. So the first topic I want to orbit here is a topic that I've almost never heard anyone talk about. Everybody's very concerned that the aliens might be deceptive. And there's a couple of problems with this. The first problem is, if you and I meet on the street and I pull a gun, you're going to change, right? And if we have lots of meetings, right, let's say I'm a group organism, and I send lots of little, scouts to meet your people, and most of the time the people go mad with terror, and they try to kill you, or they try to steal your stuff, or they flip out no matter how you try to approach them. You can try playfully and they flip out. You can try seriously and they flip out. You can try clinically and they flip out, right? So essentially, over time, it becomes very obvious that the human species is a species that just goes batshit out of its mind when it encounters novelty, especially novelty from origin, right? And so one of the things I never hear people say is that what we're seeing in the behavior of the quote-unquote NHI beings, or the quote aliens, which is a ridiculous idea. There's no such thing anywhere in time-space as an alien, though you can use the word to mean certain things if you wish. So naturally, when I go out in the world, I will meet reflections of my own, what I'm bringing to relation and participation and mutuality. If I am warlike, this will naturally cause the things that I meet to either flee or fight. Now, thankfully, the phenomena seems to very rarely fight, if ever. It's just not clear that they're warlike, generally speaking, taking the sum over the curve, the continuum of different phenomena. So the first thing I want to mention is just that the humans are insane, and they're unpredictably dangerous. They are physical, whereas many of these beings are probably not primarily physical, even though we may be seeing a physicalization of them. And even that thing is not purely physical, it's partly transcendental, right? It's like, imagine if you saw a person that was partly in a superposition and coming to you from a superposition, and you're relating with a subposition of that superposition, which is in fact the way all things are. Although the idea of superposition isn't strictly quantum mechanical here. It means that their identity is neither singular nor explicit, right? And the humans go nuts if they can't figure out what something is. But there are no whats. Whats are a thinking thing. And being things aren't whats. Right? C.F. Ian McGilchrist's The Matter with Things, and The Master and His Emissary. So, it seems unimaginable to me that we are not meeting reflections of our own present and historical behavior, not merely with visitors, but with each other and our planet. and pretty much everything alive. Okay? If you were looking at humans broad scale, you would discover very strange and almost inexplicable features of them, which have to do with killing up everything that moves, and most of what doesn't, and anything that presents novelty over time. Because apparently, ambiguity or novelty drive us out of our minds. So we try to put the torch to all that stuff, even if that stuff is other humans. And we want to regularize the universe, which is why we like machines. And regularized spaces are dead inside, right? They're like the fossilized remains of what could have been life, intelligence, insight, participation, wonder, awe, play, curiosity, developmental efflorescence. My list of favorite words. So the humans are batshit insane in nearly every case, with some few exceptions. There have been encounters between humans and people from elsewhere, beings from elsewhere, that went fairly well and were mutually supportive and polite, kind. And there's also a lot of experimentation. All right, so here's the other little pivot. Look at what humans do in nature on Earth. We are about as alien as it gets. When any organism sees a human or encounters a human, they know this may be my last moment on Earth. These beings kill arbitrarily. Apparently they think that murder is recreation, right? It's just fun to shoot shit up and make it die, and then laugh about it later and drink some beers. Watch the little animal explode as the bullet hits it, and by the way, that bullet is a time-changing and lineage-ending technology. Right? How does it kill? By accelerating time, by compressing location. Right? It kills by creating a temporal situation that is absolutely abnormal in nature. There is nothing that travels as fast as a bullet. Certain meteorites perhaps accepted around here. Or possibly projecta from certain kinds of explosions like volcanoes or something, but even that, very uncommon to encounter anything like a bullet. And although life is extremely adaptive, it doesn't have time to adapt to the onset of high-speed projectile weapons and human traps. Those things are too pervasive temporally, so there's no adaptation time. Tigers and stuff can probably out-adapt bows and arrows and spears. They can definitely not out-adapt guns, although there were records of jaguars doing this in South America. In fact, a little side plug for Lucius Shepard's book, The Jaguar Hunter, fucking amazing book, and prophetic in 9 ways. Lucius Shepard is a genius, very rare, exotic prodigy. But there's this whole thing called Tigrero, which is a film and also a book about jaguar hunters in South America, and when the colonizing peoples first came there with guns, those hunters disappeared and were never seen or heard from again. Because the jaguars had learned about guns, and they knew how to take down a human with a gun. They developed ways to do it, such that the humans that could actually kill jaguars had to do it in hand-to-hand combat, well, with a spear and possibly a sword. So it is conceivable to adapt to transformations of temporality. And there's so much here about time that I'm going to have to make, a branched bookmark for later, because time is nothing like what we are trained to think. There's no such thing as clock time. That's a prosthesis that has almost no relationship to temporality at all. It's a generalization over vast universes of complex, intelligent temporalities, synergizing to produce time fields, like the ones around living planets, which, by the way, are one of the most crucial resources that NHIs would be interested in. It's invisible to the humans. Humans don't even think about this. But living worlds produce modes of time that are very uncommon. And even if there are billions of living worlds, each one's unique temporal signature is so unique and profound that it might as well be as if that's the only one in terms of value. Right? So, in nature, we are alienated. We are alienated from each other. We are alienated from the sun, the sky. The entire history and future of life on this world, almost completely alienated from this. When organisms encounter humans, it's just as dangerous as when humans encounter UFOs. And probably much more so, because I think it's basically impossible that you could encounter a UFO that is as dissociated and relationally disoriented as any common human cohort. Right? I could have that wrong, but I think it's wildly unlikely. It's a simple matter to encounter humans that are so dissociated that they'll just kill you for fun. And it's almost impossible to encounter something from the sky that would do that for a very simple reason. If you travel, if you are aware of the networks and their diversity and their nature and their origins and their purposes, then you know for sure, right, that damage to the network lands in you. So you resist that urge. So around here, we are the aliens, and we do all the things that the humans are very scared of the aliens doing to us. And we do it to nature, our laboratories. We do all the bad things to all the living creatures, right? We have turned nature into a factory, which is lethal and stupid and deadly and kills everybody. It's idiotically torturous for all beings. If the world is a shared meta-organism, then we are ripping that to shreds for the sake of little packets of ketchup and shit. Right? So we're taking the most precious thing and using it to produce the least valuable and important things imaginable, and then ramping that process up every time we get a chance to. We are the aliens. And we seem extremely concerned about our cars. Right? So we have these static vehicles that we want to persist forever. We want them to be immortal. And we use them to physically travel from place to place, not believing that they're unnecessary for that. The humans have a vast library of faculties that they pretend don't exist, including teleportation, bilocation, farsight, travel in space-time without machines. I mean, everything you can think of, we have these abilities. But instead, we just build these death machines called cars, and we propagate them endlessly, and we preserve them over time. More than likely, any species, if they were like a species, right, they live on actual planets, which is probably a branch of the phenomena. Most likely, they do not preserve machines. Right? They forge machines for a purpose. It does the purpose, and then it's dissolved back into its components or its substrates. And then new things can be made from that, but it doesn't stay frozen in state and doesn't have to be preserved over time. Because that preservation part is dumb, unnecessary, and expensive. So you'd have liquid machines, right? Fluid machines. You have the capacity to build things that aren't even machines, right? They're superpositions above plain technology. And in this sense, you have people reporting experiences like, I think the craft was a being, right? This shows you the superpositional situation, right? It's not a single valued object that fits neatly into the lexicons the humans have composed to trap themselves in their minds within. Right? In order to understand this, you have to think, what is it that human technological development is a lesser stasis of, a hypostasis, or hypostasis? Yeah. And then when you look at that, you realize, oh, there's a beyond of machine tech. And in case that's not obvious to you, I'm using it right now. It's called language. Right? It's a very, very obvious instance of non-mechanical, yet para-technological development. So we are the aliens here. And our projection of that alienation onto the sky, onto origin, onto anything that violates the neat, dicey, untrustworthy expectation spaces that emerge from our ridiculous nonsense of lexical, like defection from intelligence and sensitivity into abstract declarations about identity and so forth that we feel very confident and authoritative about. We are the aliens. We're alien to our own mind. Right? I don't mean some people are like this, but I'm not because I see it. No. I don't mean that at all. No, I am like this. I am alien to my own soul. I am alien to my own mind. I am alien to my body. Whatever has captured the humans, that I often speak of as thrisps, have captured me as well. Right? If I actually check in with my body, there's a vast library of defections that have been stored there where I just was like, yeah, I don't give a shit about you. I'm just going to play the video game, right? I'm just going to eat the McDonald's. I'm going to smoke the cigarette. I'm going to, flick through the electronic bullshit wonderland, right? Endlessly and defect. Right? So the fact that I can see these things does not relieve me of their compulsion. Right? I too am alien to myself, and I'm trying to find ways to be less so over time. Now that I find myself at the low end of the life curve, I want to see and be a better person and a human being, and more than human. Hello. All right, so I hope that is the things that I've shared thus far are fairly obvious, I would think, but we don't usually think clearly in these ways. Right? We think the aliens are alien. We wouldn't do things like that. We do things like that all day long to each other. It's called pharmaceutical companies and Monsanto, Chevron, Exxon, the Pentagon, all these on-ons, right? The Pentagon, right? That shit will be gone. Everything will be gone. If this thing persists, everything goes away. It should just be called gone. The gone. We are gone from ourselves, we are gone from each other, we are gone from the world, we are Pentagon. Yeah, the stuff is so obvious, even in the language, that it's rather shocking that it doesn't tap us on the shoulder and get us to see, like, hey, I think something really fundamental has gone sideways here, and maybe there's something we could actually do together so that it doesn't just keep going more sideways. Every living being wants this to happen. The sky wants it to happen. The sun, the planet, everything in the universe is aching for the humans to grow a clue. And they keep giving us spores and petri dishes, and we keep turning them into weapons. That's alien. That's about as alien as you can get. So I think we are the aliens, not the aliens. All right, hopefully I've hammered that topic home with sufficient enthusiasm to make it stick. So in the beginning of the last talk, I spoke a little bit about a conversation I had with a companion who's reading the Ohlone Way, this book, The Ohlone Way, about the indigenous Ohlone people of California, and particularly the Bay Area. And he said some things. Now, I don't speak for indigenous people, they can speak for themselves. And my knowledge of their ways of life and such, while fascinating to me and very compelling to me and very important to me, is wildly incomplete because I do not live in their way and I do not live with and as them, so to speak, or where The indigenous people are part of my we group, my us groups. But I do think of them as part of my we and us groups in terms of origin, nature, the world, insight, intelligence, and so forth, because it's very obvious that many indigenous peoples, not all, were deeply aware of problems in language that lead to deception if you take them too seriously. And they had protocols to avoid this in their languages, right? Multiple approaches to identity, avoiding single-valued identities, avoiding explicit identity, recognizing that names and naming things can be a trap that blinds you or even gets you killed and ruins your relationships. So for this reason, the strange predilection of moderns to have identity stated explicitly, to know what something is or who someone is, was kind of the opposite of a lot of their intelligence and knowledge. And they were very careful in the same way we are careful in a surgical theater to evict those things from important places in ceremony and relationship. We didn't even have what we call ceremony. It wasn't distinct from living. They may have had a way of speaking toward this aspect of everything that is, but they would not see it the way we might as a separate behavior. Everything is imbued with ceremonial significance, with ritual significance, with spiritual significance, relational significance, everything. Every movement, every action. It's not separated off for special attention on Sundays. Under the aegis of some weaponized thrisp that's trying to capture everyone with threats of eternal damnation and so forth, right? So this is really important to see clearly and deeply into this matter. Explicit distinguishing leads to extinguishing your intelligence, right? And there are contexts, contingent contexts, with limited scope where that kind of thinking is valuable and useful, until and unless it escapes that scope and begins to pervade over all thinking or evaluation or relationships. And usually it does this by evicting them, counterfeiting the absence of them, and representing the absence as a presence, right? Nike, yeah, Exxon, Monsanto, Disneyland, Hollywood, right? Hollywood is the absence of everything we're living being presented as a spectacle to remind us that once we used to have adventures that were meaningful and roles that mattered. And so instead of actually having those, we get representations of their absence presented as presences. It's crucially important to see this particular mechanism that is very thrispy. It captures humans, right? Corporations. It's fake togetherness, right? Severance is kind of about this. Really interesting show that I liked. Fake missions, fake identities, fake adventures, all orbiting money, power, and the preservation of representations of what we have lost, being sold back to us from afar at ever-increasing prices, including everything. New ways to sacrifice everything for nothing, or literally for the absence of isness, which is the basis of abstract thought, and science, and clinicity. Again, very useful in a limited scope, lethal outside it, right? Kind of like plutonium. If you really want to make bombs, plutonium is the shit. But what happens if you make bombs? Everything dies. So it's self-undermining, right? The most important thing becomes the last thing that was ever important and the wrong thing to have focused on. So the Ohlone, among other things, so one of the things that I thought was ironic was that my companion said they never speak of death. Well, isn't that hilarious? Because if I say, I don't wish to talk about death, I'm talking about death. You see this mechanism here? This is really important. Positive declarations and even negative declarations, if universalized, are self-undermining because they capture their own root and counterfeit it back as authoritative knowledge. This is a kind of fascism in the mind. Right? It's not that we don't know things, or that we can't know things. It's that explicit universal declarations are ironically self-conflicted. Another crucial principle to see. So, like other indigenous peoples, if someone dies, to hear it told from this book. I don't know if the author is an Ohlone person or not. So when someone dies, they burn their home, they burn their belongings, they burn them. No one keeps anything. Apparently they don't think there's life after death. They don't have narratives about this, and they don't have much of creation stories according to this book. All of these things I'm saying are according to not just the book, but what I heard from my companion who was reading it. They don't have long history. Many indigenous peoples do have creation stories and long history, but not all of them. And some of them have stories, but they're not really creation stories, qua creation stories, quote unquote. They're ancient, they're old stories or origin stories. And some of them do have creation stories. So they're really afraid of ghosts, but they don't seem to believe in an afterlife, which is very strange. And they don't make a distinction between dreaming experiences and, quote, the real, the waking world. They don't have that distinction, which is really interesting because obviously both experiences are real. Right? They're both actual experiences that humans have, and sometimes together, even though we don't think that as moderns, because it violates our expectation space, so we refuse to look at it, like most of the things we refuse to look at when we refuse to look at them. So, there was an interesting moment in Rogan's podcast near the end where Rogan is talking about a dream, a very important dream that he had. I think he claims it is the most realistic dream he has ever had, and he does have some interesting insights around this, and one of them was that with each retelling of the tale, he's not sure whether he's actually telling the tale or retelling the last retelling. This is very important because we presume that memory is a recording of things that occurred, but that's not what human memory is mostly for. What it's mostly for is seeing into futures and insightfully reframing and understanding pasts. So that's a transformer network. That's not here we have a photograph of what took place. No, it's not for that. So Joe's onto something when he says that. That's important. I think every time we touch memory in our minds, we are changing the content. There's no such thing as static memory. It's not like memory in a computer. It's not like what's written in a book at all. It doesn't even resemble that. It has an entirely different purposive orientation, structural anatomy, and it's for transforming, not for recording. So Joe begins telling about his dream. Actually, before this, they keep making this apology. If this stuff's real. They're talking about the phenomenon, UFOs, UAP, which, by the way, includes the entire paranormal, near-death experiences, Bigfoot, cryptids, telepathy, resurrection, touch healing, psychism, prophecy, you name it, right? This all belongs to something we can see as a unified category meaningfully and usefully. It's not just things in the sky, It's things that violate our expectation of a continuous concrete reality outside us that can be objectively or empirically examined to determine, quote, what is the case, unquote. Right? And the degree to which we are capable of determining what is the case is not zero, but it's very small compared to what is generating the cases and the evaluative perspectival framings that are employed to deduce what is the case. So Joe, they keep, throughout part of the recording, they're like, yeah, if this stuff is real, it's bananas, or whatever, right? If it's real. And then at some point, Michael Masters, who has written a number of fascinating books, none of which I have read, but is a really interesting mind, he mentions that he's going to be teaching a course on the phenomena, UFOs and so forth, and that they're not going to mess with the is it real question at all. They're just going to take it as real, right? This has happened to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. This is an actual thing that occurs. We're just going to start there and then look into the phenomena. And so Joe asks him, well, why are you convinced? And Joe's like, I want to believe, I just can't. Blah, blah, blah. Joe's got some excuses. And, Michael says something that I would say. I've read so many reports, the correspondences between them are staggering. There's no chance this could be, simultaneously made up and match these profiles across time and culture and all of these things. And I've had my own experience. I've seen, these lights that did impossible things. They came together, they went apart, they zoomed up into the sky at an impossible speed, like as if they were achieving warp drive or something. And, I heard my own father's testimony. I interviewed my father later about his experience. And I know that he's telling me what occurred. He's not making things up. Now, what's really weird about this, they're just making things up, is that you're making up that they're making things up, right? If you think, you have no idea. It's like telling me you didn't taste a peach. I wasn't there. You can't prove that you tasted a peach. I don't believe you, right? That's actually making things up. And this is the problem with ironic counterpositions, which is fundamental to human psychology. Right? We take some position that deprives us of liberty, intelligence, insight, perspectival liberty, and then we assert this as authoritative over all situations. Good luck with that, right? If you were trying to walk with that stupid a heuristic, you would never move. You would just smash into things over and over again. And then you would claim that there's nothing there. You're just imagining the things you're smashing into, because there are no things to smash into. That's just made up, right? So, ironic counterpositions, yes, the basis of human intelligence. Counterposes, actually, is the right word, ironic counterposes. So Michael takes the phenomena totally seriously. Joe would like to, but he's married to his skepticism. Unfortunate for Joe, but Joe had this crazy dream in which he meets something that seems pretty NHI-ish in a context that seems like it could be the inside of a UFO. Not saying it is. And the dream deeply affects him. And really, they're just kind of messing around with him. They try to shock and scare him, and then they laugh like it's a joke, right? And it's Joe says, I think they're like trying to get me to relax and not be so fascinated with my own ontological shock, right? So, Joe then says something like, oh, it was just a dream. And Michael says, well, why do you think that? And he's like, well, dreams aren't real, or whatever he says. And Michael says something very important. How do you know that dreams aren't real? Why do you think they're not real? Right? And Joe, blathers on a bit. And Michael says, I think they're real. I think that space is more real than this one, the one we trust. And Joe basically like goes into shock, and he's like, oh dude, don't do that, you just snapped me. Joe cannot entertain this possibility. But this is the way that most ancient peoples did think, feel, and believe. They had no reason to separate the logics of dreaming from the logics of the waking world. And the logics of dreaming are vastly more intelligent and profound than the logics of the waking world. And they don't care about explicit identity, they care about relationship, right? If my sister shows up in a dream and she's in a man's body, not a problem. If my sister shows up in a dream and she's a book, not a problem. She's a bird, not a problem. She's a forest, not a problem. Right? Problem for the waking mind, no problem for the dreaming mind. In fact, better that way. Right? Because from other perspectives of identity, we can see new things. From a single perspective of identity, you are blind to anything that violates the identity that you have asserted in consciousness. Yeah. Crucial to see this. So many indigenous peoples did not really, they may have been able to distinguish in language between dreaming and an experience I had. They may not have. There may have been no reason to do that. But what we do is completely ass backwards. We think, no, the waking world is real. That dreaming stuff is just a bunch of nonsense. Oh, it's just the mind taking out the garbage. No, no. The garbage is the waking mind. That's what's being taken out, right? It's the expectation of static identity known to cognition in concepts and language. That's garbage, right? In any context where, the scope isn't small enough that that kind of thinking is useful or important, that kind of thinking is lethal to insight. It might as well be just, if insight was a person and they were drinking liquid mercury, this is what the waking mind is like. And they're like, yeah, it's better this way. It's better single-valued identity that I know what it is. Which means your identity becomes single-valued because your identity is determined by relationship. It's not intrinsic to you, right? It's determined by what you do and how you do things and where and with whom and why. It's not just something sitting there, Darren, finished, done. Here's the characteristics of Darren. We've done the analysis. He's 67% X and 19% Y, and under certain conditions, some Z flops up. No, there's nothing like that except in thought. Right? And that kind of thinking, while useful in contingent contexts, is insane outside them. Right? Imagine a bird that could only fly when the wind was coming from west-southwest at precisely 3.427 miles per hour. That's the waking mind. Right? It wants the same thing that happened last time. And look, it's not that it's unuseful, it produces shortcuts. The problem is that shortcuts are developmentally damaging where they are not liberating. And they are in some ways liberating, right? There's this thing, you can kind of offload decision-making, vigilance, analysis, evaluation. You can offload it to priors. And you get shortcuts, not unuseful, but deadly if you depend on them, right? Most of our technology is shortcuts. The car is a shortcut. The oven is a shortcut. The refrigerator is a shortcut. The computer is a shortcut. AI. Massive shortcut factory that's going to shortcut intelligence itself in humans. Because they'll go for the product and having no relationship with the product will become meaningless to them. But they'll keep valuing it ever more fervently as the process and their engagement in the process and their development in the process disappears from their experience. So I thought that was absolutely brilliant when Michael Masters, who's had at least one really profound non-ordinary experience, probably at Contact in the Desert, I think that's where he was, where some apparent humans corralled him off to the side and gave him some kind of a information dump with his permission that had a radical and life-changing effect on him. And certainly convinced him that the regular world that the humans think is real cannot be real. Or rather, the scope of its reality is much more limited than the humans imagine. So yeah, brilliant move by Michael to say, why would you doubt your dream was real? Totally cheering that on. It's one of the only times I've ever heard a human being say something like that in my life. No one that I've talked to would say, dreams are more real than what happens to you when you're awake. And Michael was bold enough to say that. Kudos to you, brother. That was a brilliant moment of being human right there. Violate the violators. Right? Pull the rug right out from underneath. That aspect of conceptual thought, abstract, disengaged, dissociated, that lords its authority over all phenomena and masquerades as certainty or even truth or, quote, the facts, unquote. Let's put an end to that fucking masquerade forever. Again, contingent contexts where it's useful, accepted. The universe is not a thing. The sun is not a thing. In the same way you have fingerprints at the tips of your fingers, the sun has organisms on this living world. Every phenomena here is a solar phenomena. It comes from time-space. It doesn't come from the earth. It doesn't come from humans. We are not superior or in some way supreme. We are a special organ that has lost nearly all of its understanding of its nature's origins, purposive orientations, faculties, capacities, abilities, and replaced those with dead prostheses that kill by existing. There's nothing as alien as that. That's straight up alien. You know, take a look at Gaza right now, right? Just do a flyover on Google Maps or whatever. What did that? Was it humans? Well, it's really complicated. Humans enacted the protocols that created that result, but those humans are captured by something. What are they captured by? Thoughts, ideas, and evaluations of living beings that lead you to obliterate them. Right? That's not human. That is not human nature. I don't care what your argument is. That is the nature of humans captured by the things that create colonizing, the colonizing aspect, red snake, right? Which is super useful. You don't want to get rid of it. But if you keep it awake all the time and you keep supporting it, then what happens is apocalypse. And the scope may be one person or 1 million people or all of the people. But that thing just generates apocalypse. It's not supposed to be kept awake at all moments. Much like your own vigilance systems, right? If those are awake at all moments, you'll die of stress right quick. Yeah? Is there a branch of the phenomena that represents something resembling our species in the future? Most likely there is. Is that the explanation for the whole phenomena? Not possible. Totally not possible. Wildly unlikely and inconceivably just not possible. It's a branch worth exploring, speculatively, and perhaps even scientifically. But there's no chance that you can collapse it all down to just that one thing. Because even the idea of species is confused. If you start out from unity, then species become like organs of meta-beings, right? Of beings up the ladder from hypostasis to stasis to metastasis to transstasis to origin. And 0 people have an explanation for why there are organisms at all. None. Now, obviously, the universe is organismy, right? It produces organisms because it's like organisms. It is like the above, right? The hyperstasis, in the same way the sun, right, is not an animal, but it produces animals here, moment to moment, instant to instant, not just historically, as an expression of its activity and natures. Yeah? Time-space is the same way. Time-space is just one layer. There are other layers. It's very important to be able to see from this perspective and to distrust the nonsense we've been indoctrinated with by modern human conceptual thought. Again, not unuseful, completely ruinous if taken seriously and projected universally over all phenomena. What could possibly happen to make any species that dumb? Well, I mean, I know some secrets about this, and it's a cascade, right? It's a series of historical transformations in our people, probably beginning with a series of problems that separated our minds in our direct experience in the waking world from the star that generates minds the way our sun generates light. Yeah. And long ago, we have these stories about the Holy Spirit or the Spirit of Truth or the guardian angel, right? These are stories about from the before of those accidents, when this was a common aspect of every organism's experience and all human experience on this world. The story of how we got broken is too complex to introduce here, but I felt I should make some peripheral comments about it. So I have probably failed, but every time I sit at the piano, I fail. I fail to do what I can envision, what I can feel and sense and hope for, but I go in that direction, right? And it's the continual going in that direction that is truly precious and valuable. And the space in which we can do that together, this world, this living world, whom I adore with my whole heart, and the living beings, children of the sky. I love them. Right? Even the poor, confused Homo sapiens. We have an obligation, I have an obligation to make the attempt, right? No matter how trivial it may seem, how ineffective it may seem here and now, to make the attempt to bust the prison, yeah? Shatter them walls, make an egress, lead a few children outside, let them look around, taste the water, talk to the sky. This is the way. So grateful for this time and all the beings who have educated me and fed me and nurtured me, protected me throughout my life. Real and non. So grateful to all of you who listen, participate, ask questions, or support my channel. Please take a moment to like, share, ask a question, share some of your own insight or curiosity or wonder. Level some criticisms, or make a donation if that feels natural to you. On the About page of my YouTube channel, there's links to buy me a coffee, Venmo, etc. So if you want to make a Patreon, if you want to make a donation, deeply appreciate that, and I am extremely grateful to my new supporter. Thank you, personally, from me to you. It means a lot to me. I wish you beauty, love, meaningful roles, adventure, play, curiosity, creativity, wonder, coloring outside the lines, sanity, coherence, but not at the expense of adventure. I wish you the fulfillment of the promise of your human incarnation this time around. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now. And Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to you and those you love and everyone, all the living beings on this world, and all those who came before and all those who come after. May the spirit of unity, peace, love, mutuality, respect, recognition, awareness, and relation prevail on our world. Bye-bye for now. I look forward to learning together again very soon.